What happens when countries that were once seen as loyal partners of Washington quietly begin building bridges with each other, outside of America's shadow? That's exactly what we're witnessing right now as Canada and Italy move closer together. At first glance, it might seem like a simple trade or diplomatic gesture. But beneath the surface, it represents something far more profound. This isn't just about new agreements, it's about two nations recognizing that the old order no longer serves their interests, and that, depending on the U.S., comes with risks they can no longer afford. Energy, trade, defense, and global influence are all on the table, and both Canada and Italy see an opportunity to strengthen their positions by working together, rather than waiting for America's permission. The real question is not whether this alliance matters, it's how much it will reshape the balance of power. Because every move away from Washington is a move toward a multipolar world, and this time, the U.S. may find itself watching from the sidelines. When we talk about Canada and Italy teaming up, the first thing that demands our attention is energy. The lifeblood of nations, the silent force that shapes diplomacy and determines who thrives and who struggles. For decades, Europe has been locked in a struggle over energy dependence, especially on Russian gas, and Italy has felt that vulnerability more than most. Canada, on the other hand, sits on vast reserves of natural resources, from oil and gas to critical minerals essential for the green transition. When these two countries look at each other, they don't just see trading partners. They see solutions to some of their deepest strategic challenges. Italy wants security, a way to ensure that its people are not at the mercy of foreign suppliers who can turn off the tap at any moment. Canada wants access, a way to ensure that its energy and resources reach markets that truly value stability and reliability. Together, they create a bridge. Italy gains the assurance of supply, while Canada finds an eager gateway into Europe. This is not merely transactional, it is structural. It lays the foundation for long-term energy interdependence, one that loosens the grip of American oversight and diversifies both nations' options. But the story doesn't stop at oil and gas. The real transformation lies in renewable energy and the green transition. Both Canada and Italy understand that the world is pivoting towards sustainability, not as a choice but as a necessity. Italy has ambitious climate goals, yet it lacks the natural abundance that Canada holds in critical materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, the very elements needed for solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicles. By aligning with Canada, Italy is buying more than resources, it is buying a stake in the future. And Canada, for its part, gains a partner that has the technological capacity and industrial infrastructure to turn raw materials into innovations. Think of it this way, energy is not just about powering lights and heating homes, it is about sovereignty. Whoever controls energy controls influence. When Italy looks to Canada, it is not just choosing a supplier, it is choosing freedom from dependence on the whims of others. When Canada looks to Italy, it is not just selling a product, it is embedding itself in the very heart of Europe's energy transformation. The U.S. cannot ignore this shift because every barrel of oil, every shipment of LNG, and every ton of minerals that bypasses American control is a signal that the world no longer runs through Washington alone. So, this alliance on energy is not a minor adjustment, it is a declaration. A declaration that smaller powers are learning to act strategically, to protect themselves, and to prepare for a future in which survival depends on partnerships, not permissions. The energy corridor between Canada and Italy is more than infrastructure. It is a symbol of independence. And that is the truth we must reflect on. Energy alliances are never just about fuel, they are about freedom. The deeper question is whether America will recognize that the world has changed, or whether it will only realize it when it is already too late. When we move from energy to trade, the picture becomes even clearer. Canada and Italy are not just aligning out of convenience, they are strategically positioning themselves to diversify markets and reduce dependence on the traditional routes dominated by the United States. For decades, America has been the anchor of both Canadian and European trade, setting the terms, shaping the agreements, and often benefiting disproportionately from the flows of goods and services. But in today's climate, where global supply chains are under pressure and the world economy is fragmenting into regional blocks, Canada and Italy are recognizing the danger of putting too many eggs in one basket. Italy has long been one of the beating hearts of Europe's economy, renowned for its design, its fashion, its manufacturing, and its cultural exports. Yet it is also aware of its vulnerabilities: rising energy costs, limited domestic resources, and an over-reliance on the European Union's collective bargaining power. Canada, with its rich natural resources and relatively stable economy, offers Italy a chance to build trade ties that strengthen its autonomy outside of Brussels and Washington. In return, Italy gives Canada a direct gateway to European markets, particularly Southern Europe, where trade opportunities are growing and competition is fierce. What's fascinating here is the psychology of nations. Both Canada and Italy, in their own ways, have lived in the shadow of larger powers. Canada under the weight of US dominance, Italy under the combined weight of European bureaucracy and American influence. By choosing to work more closely together, they are in effect declaring that middle powers are no longer content to simply follow. They are crafting their own alliances, building their own safety nets, and ensuring that their futures are not tied exclusively to the fortunes of the United States. Trade in this context becomes much more than numbers on a balance sheet. It becomes a story of independence, a quiet form of resistance against the expectation that Washington will always set the rules. The agreements Canada and Italy are pursuing, whether in agriculture, manufacturing, or high-tech sectors, are bricks in a new structure, one that allows them to withstand the tremors of U.S. policies, tariffs, or boycotts. Every deal signed between Ottawa and Rome is, in a sense, a vote of confidence in a multipolar future where cooperation is not dictated by power, but by mutual interest. This is why America cannot simply shrug it off as another trade pact, because it is not just a pact, it is a precedent. If Canada can deepen its ties with Italy, why not with France? Why not with Spain or Germany? If Italy can strengthen its access to Canadian resources, why not replicate the model with other middle powers? Slowly, these smaller threads of cooperation weave a fabric that no longer requires America to hold it together. And here lies the deeper reflection. Trade is no longer about who can produce the cheapest goods or move the fastest ships. It is about trust, resilience, and shared vision. Canada and Italy are showing the world that alliances built on balance and respect may ultimately prove stronger than those built on dominance and dependence. The U.S. still holds great power, but the truth is undeniable. The monopoly on influence has ended. The future belongs to those who are willing to diversify, and in that diversification lies real strength. When we speak of trade between Canada and Italy, it's tempting to frame it in terms of simple economics, exports, imports, and market opportunities. But in truth, this partnership represents something far deeper, a conscious shift in how nations perceive security in an age of uncertainty. For too long, Canada's trade patterns have been tethered overwhelmingly to the United States, with nearly 3/4 of its exports crossing the southern border. That imbalance has always been a point of quiet vulnerability, leaving Canada exposed to political winds it cannot control. Italy, too, understands this fragility, for it has long relied heavily on the broader European Union and its often sluggish, consensus-driven mechanisms. In each case, dependence has come at the cost of agility, of freedom of choice. So when Canada and Italy turn toward one another, what we see is not simply diversification for the sake of numbers, it is diversification for the sake of sovereignty. By building alternative trade corridors, they are ensuring themselves against the shocks that come from over-reliance on a single partner, no matter how powerful that partner might be. This is not a rejection of the United States, but it is a rebalancing, a recognition that even the strongest allies must prepare for the possibility that their interests will not always align. And in that recognition lies a profound wisdom. Think for a moment about what trade truly represents. At its core, it is not merely the exchange of goods and services, it is the weaving of trust, the creation of interdependence, the subtle merging of destinies. Every shipment of Canadian grain that reaches Italian ports, every Italian machine that finds its way into Canadian factories, is not just a business transaction, it is a thread binding two nations closer together. Over time, those threads strengthen, and what begins as commerce evolves into something sturdier, a shared sense of reliability, a bond that cannot be easily severed by external pressure. And this is what Washington often fails to grasp. Trade, when done strategically, is not about efficiency. It is about resilience. The Canada-Italy connection is not being built on the assumption of endless growth, but on the understanding that the future will be volatile, and that survival will depend on having multiple doors open, not just one. To some, this may appear as hedging. But in truth it is a form of quiet courage, the courage to say that no single power should be able to dictate the prosperity of another. As we reflect on this shift, it's important to recognize its deeper meaning. What Canada and Italy are doing is not unique to them. It is part of a larger pattern sweeping across the globe. Nations everywhere are awakening to the risks of reliance, and they are choosing to build webs of cooperation that bypass the old hierarchies. The United States may still hold immense sway, but each of these agreements chips away at the illusion that its dominance is unshakable. The real lesson here is not about trade routes or economic policy. It is about freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to act, freedom to secure one's future without waiting for permission. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all, in seeking greater control for itself. America may have inspired its allies to seek greater control for themselves. That is a truth worth pondering, because once nations taste real autonomy, they rarely give it back. Energy is not just the lifeblood of economies, it is the hidden architecture of power. Whoever controls energy supply chains controls not only markets, but also the very pace at which societies move forward. This is where the partnership between Canada and Italy becomes especially significant, because it goes beyond trade in goods or even political symbolism. At its core, it represents a calculated effort to reimagine energy security in a world where old certainties are collapsing and new vulnerabilities are being exposed. For Canada, the story begins with abundance. Blessed with vast reserves of natural resources, from hydroelectric power to oil, gas, and the rapidly expanding potential of renewables, Canada has long had the raw materials to be a central player in global energy markets. Yet for decades, its infrastructure and trade routes have funneled the majority of these resources southward, tying its energy future to the United States. For Italy, the story is the opposite. A nation with limited domestic resources, historically dependent on imports, and painfully aware of how fragile that dependence becomes in times of crisis. The war in Ukraine was a stark reminder, as Russian gas supplies, once a cornerstone of European energy, turned overnight into a geopolitical liability. When these two stories converge, what emerges is not just an exchange of resources, but an exchange of strengths and needs that fit together with striking precision. Canada can offer reliability, stability, and diversification. Italy can offer access to Europe's broader energy grid and a gateway into markets that are desperate for secure alternatives to volatile suppliers. Together, they are writing a narrative that challenges the traditional assumption that energy flows must always be dictated by geography or old alliances. And this is precisely why the United States watches such moves with unease. For decades it has positioned itself as the indispensable partner in energy, projecting influence through pipelines, trade agreements, and technological dominance. But when allies begin building energy corridors that bypass Washington's oversight, it signals something far more consequential than lost market share. It signals the erosion of leverage. Energy independence, after all, is not only about lights staying on in cities or factories humming with activity. It is about the ability of nations to say no when pressured, to chart their own course without fear of retaliation. Philosophically, this shift speaks to a deeper human truth. Dependence, whether personal or national, breeds caution, even submission. Independence, by contrast, breeds confidence. When a nation like Italy can look beyond its traditional suppliers and anchor itself in new partnerships with countries like Canada, it is reclaiming a measure of dignity, a sense of freedom that cannot be measured solely in barrels or megawatts. And when Canada chooses to extend its resources not only to its southern neighbor, but across the Atlantic, it is declaring that its future will not be confined to a single gatekeeper. What we are witnessing, then, is not just a redrawing of energy maps. It is a redrawing of psychological maps, the inner landscapes of trust, fear, and ambition that shape international behavior. Canada and Italy are reminding us that energy is never just about fuel, it is about freedom. And once nations taste the power of deciding for themselves where their energy comes from, the world begins to change in ways no single superpower can easily contain. The message is clear: energy security is freedom security, and freedom security is the foundation of true sovereignty. That is the future Canada and Italy are daring to claim, and it is a future no force can indefinitely deny. When we examine alliances like the one forming between Canada and Italy, it's easy to focus solely on the economics, on the trade agreements, the energy contracts, or the market figures that make headlines. But beneath those statistics lies something even more transformative: the power of cultural and strategic alignment. Partnerships endure not because of numbers on a balance sheet, but because they are rooted in shared values, complementary visions, and a willingness to build trust where uncertainty once stood. This is what gives the Canada-Italy relationship its weight, and why it resonates far beyond commerce. Think of it this way: every major alliance in history has carried with it an unspoken cultural narrative. The United States once dominated the global stage not just with its military or its wealth, but with an identity it projected, a promise of freedom, innovation, and opportunity that others aspired to. Today, as America grapples with its own internal divisions and shifting global perception, new narratives are rising to the surface. Canada, with its emphasis on stability, inclusivity, and sustainability, speaks to a world tired of volatility. Italy, with its deep historical roots in art, philosophy, and diplomacy, represents resilience, adaptability, and an ability to balance tradition with reinvention. When these identities converge, they create not only a trade partnership but a story that resonates with nations seeking alternatives to the old power centers. Strategic alignment is also about more than reacting to crises. It's about envisioning a future together. Italy has been looking to reshape its role within Europe, positioning itself as a bridge between the Mediterranean, Africa, and Northern Europe. Canada, meanwhile, seeks to expand its global footprint without being forever tethered to its southern neighbor. In this light, their partnership is not accidental. It is intentional, crafted to extend influence beyond their borders and to redefine the spaces they occupy in global politics. The philosophical lesson here is profound. Human beings, and by extension nations, cannot thrive in isolation. Strength comes from relationships, but not from just any relationships. It comes from those in which values align, visions converge, and trust can grow. That's why Canada and Italy's collaboration matters. It's not built on coercion or desperation, but on mutual recognition of possibility. Each sees in the other not only a partner of convenience but a partner of purpose. And this is precisely where the United States faces its greatest challenge. It's not merely that it risks losing markets or resources, it risks losing the cultural loyalty and symbolic influence that once made it indispensable. When nations begin to believe they can thrive without leaning on Washington, they begin to craft their own futures with confidence, and confidence, once awakened, is hard to suppress. So the significance of Canada and Italy's alliance is not just that they are doing business together. It is that they are telling the world a new story about what global cooperation can look like. One built less on dominance and more on partnership. That kind of story has power. That kind of story spreads. And if there is anything history teaches us, it is that stories, not weapons or wealth, are what ultimately shape the destiny of nations. The reflection is simple but vital when values align. The future belongs to those who dare to collaborate with vision rather than control with fear.